Thank you all for joining us today. This is our first Visions Lunchtime CEU. We will be having one for the next 4 weeks, so keep an eye out on the website and then also on our Facebook pages. My name is Dr. Karenga. I am the Director of Clinical Relations for Visions Adolescent Treatment Centers. So for those of you who may not know us, we have been around for 18 years, treating adolescents ages 12 through 18. We have 2 primary mental health residentials, a dual diagnosis residential, and 2 extended care homes. We offer PHP, IOP, day school, and a specialty clinic at our West LA location. And we are still accepting clients at all levels of care, but obviously with enhanced pre-screening procedures in accordance with the CDC protocols that have been set out. So just so you know, the IOP, day school, and specialty clinic are currently virtual at this time. So a little housekeeping before I introduce our presenter. We will be keeping attendance during this presentation, and if you wish to receive a CEU, you will be required to stay for the full presentation. Toward the end, during the Q&A section, we will be posting the link to the participant evaluation form. So please fill that out. Once we've received your form, you will receive a certificate via email. So if you have any questions, you can put them in the Q&A box at the bottom, and we will be answering all questions at the end of the presentation. We won't be answering them, Dr. Larissy won't be answering them throughout the presentation. So any questions you have, pop them in the bottom or take a note of them and you can pop them in while we're doing the Q&A. So it's now my pleasure to introduce our presenter for today, Dr. Noah Larissy. Dr. Larissy is a clinical psychologist who works with teens and adolescents. He specializes in the treatment of anxiety and the OCD spectrum and is extensively trained in evidence-based modalities. Dr. Larissy is also one of our experts at the Vision Specialty Clinic. If you want to read more about him, you're welcome to go to our website and you can see his bio and see a little bit more about him. So without further ado, I want to turn it over to Dr. Larissy. Thank you.
Hi, welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us during your lunch hour. It's an honor and a privilege to be able to speak to you during this time. So today we're going to talk a lot about how to manage and fear and anxiety and live your values during this time of uncertainty. So the first thing we're going to kind of talk about today, I'm going to go over the 5 things are, we're going to review fear and anxiety, which a lot of you already know, but it'll be a good time to kind of review what they are and what their differences are. We're going to talk about health anxiety and how that's showing up right now. We're going to do some concrete clinical tips. These are things you can use with your clients right now to kind of help manage their anxiety and fear in the short term. We're going to do an acceptance and commitment therapy exercise together that will kind of bring all this stuff together. And then we're going to have some time for some final thoughts and questions and discussion. So, you know, some of you may be wondering, why me? I am not an expert on the coronavirus or anything like that. So what would I have to offer today? And what I would say is that while I don't have any sort of medical knowledge, I have gotten pretty good at managing extremely anxious people, right? So the whole world right now is kind of acting like they have an anxiety disorder or OCD. So a lot of things that we use in treating people with anxiety, we can apply to all of our clients right now. I would say that the majority of the people that I work with right now who have been with me for a while and have gone through anxiety treatment, I would say are doing better than the average person out there right now in terms of managing things, because they know how to deal with fear, they know how to deal with anxiety. So there's a lot that I think we can do to pass on to people in the short term to help them out. So just getting into it now, what is anxiety? We all have it. And fear and anxiety are similar, but not exactly the same. So fear is a series of physiological responses to an imminent threat. That's something that is very much present right now, all right? Anxiety is going to be a series of responses to a perceived threat. Now, the way that I kind of like to explain this to people is if there's an earthquake and you're right in the middle of it and you're looking for a safe place, right? That's a fear response. But if it's a week after the earthquake and you're still looking around and you're checking things and you're planning, that's going to be anxiety. All right. So fear is when there's an imminent threat. Anxiety is when there is a perceived threat. Anxiety is going to be maintained by negative reinforcement, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. Essentially, that means that any attempt that we make to make anxiety go away or to try to avoid it actually makes it worse and maintains it, right? And anxiety disorders emerge when a vicious cycle happens in which we avoid so much that we end up reinforcing the anxiety and creating this cycle that goes on, and it starts making our life really small. So continuing on that, fear is somewhat unpleasant, but not necessarily debilitating. I think something I've noticed over the past couple of weeks in myself is that, yes, there is fear there, but you can still operate under fear, right? You can still go to work, you can still show up, you can still do things, right? It's obviously, it's not a nice feeling, but it's kind of a low-level discomfort. Anxiety is very different. Anxiety is both unpleasant and can be debilitating. It's worse than fear, right? So anxiety in some way is going to be a very acute fear. Anxiety is so unpleasant, in fact, that we will engage in all sorts of behaviors to make it go away. And these include, obviously, avoidance, reassurance seeking, and all types of compulsions. Okay. So this is pretty basic, and a lot of you guys will already know this, but the things we're going to look for with people with anxiety are going to be what if questions, worst case scenario, the need to know things, right? Things like, I can't handle this, right? Triggers for uncomfortable feelings like worry, fear, anger, shame. These will all also cause some anxiety. And some responses to these experiences could be avoiding taking risks, reassurance, spending a lot of time on electronics, increased substance use, or isolating. So these are all the kind of the traditional things that show up. And we're going to apply all these to the current situation as we keep going. Just kind of the last of the review here is anxiety will show up with some sort of a trigger, usually in the form of a thought. Because remember, this is a perceived threat. So the thought, the trigger is always going to come from our heads, right? That's going to cause our anxiety to rise. We're then going to do things like avoid or do something to make the anxiety go down. That's going to give us some short-term relief, but that's actually going to reinforce that original thought and make the whole cycle go around and round, all right? So anxiety disorders, this is the current numbers, right? Aside, just in normal times, right? Not right now, right? So if we look at these numbers there, they're quite high, and you can only imagine right now what they must be, right? With the acute anxiety probably at an all-time level. So let's talk about how anxiety is showing up, especially today. So many people now, you could even say the world is acting like they have an anxiety disorder. Acute anxiety is at an all-time high. People are acting in an abundance of caution, okay? And that's abundance of caution, I'd say, is a really good description of someone living with an anxiety disorder. So anxiety really is going to feed on uncertainty, all right? And we're going to talk a lot about uncertainty today. Boredom is also a great fuel for anxiety. And since everyone or a lot of people are at home with not a lot to do, it really is a great place for anxiety to fester. People right now are home around their families, the kids are home from school, everyone's together. That's also going to raise people's anxiety levels. Their sleep is disturbed. That's also going to contribute to it. Obviously, unemployment is also an incredible stressor, and the huge amount of financial insecurity, anxiety that's coming up. And obviously, this question of when is this going to end? That's the one I seem to be getting the most from people, and everyone wants to know this, right? That's kind of the question on everyone's mind. And the worst one, obviously, is what if it never ends? Now, quick thing before I get into this is that obviously some of you are probably wondering, well, isn't anxiety like a normal reaction to this? And I would say, yes, of course. But anxiety can also start to feed on itself, right? And create this vicious cycle. So yes, we're in a difficult situation, and it's certainly not going to be pleasant. And some anxiety is going to be adaptive and understandable, but there's also, this is also the time when it can really start to go out of control. And while we cannot necessarily fix the outside situation, there's a lot we can do to actually manage anxiety during this time. So, okay. So we all know about fight or flight, and we know how a lot of the physiological things that can happen, right? You sweat and your heart races. But I thought I would talk today a little bit about some of the cognitive components that happen during fight or flight. So during fight or flight, the limbic system and the amygdala are going to be activated, and they're essentially going to then override the prefrontal cortex. And so reason and logic during this time are going to pretty much go offline, right? So when you try to talk to someone who's anxious and you try to use a lot of, reason and logic, it's just not going to work. It just goes right. It doesn't register. Working memory is also going to go down during this time when you're triggered from anxiety. Okay. You're going to have an over attention to negative stimuli. So things are really going to appear worse than they are, right? Any ambiguous situation is going to generally be perceived as negative, right? So there's going to be a lot of these biases that come up. Even ambiguous people are going to be perceived as hostile. And you're actually going to have the belief that you have more control than you actually do, in the sense that your thinking is going to become more rigid. Okay, you're going to actually really become convinced that your thinking is right. So your cognitive flexibility is really going to go down during this time, right? When you're in fight or flight. So in short, it's not the best time to make decisions, right? You see a lot of people, a lot of people selling their stocks, making very impulsive moves that I think later on, many of them will come to regret. Okay, so what do we do about it? So while we can't do a whole sort of anxiety treatment thing right now, the basics are as follows. The initial whoosh of anxiety that we experience is going to be out of our control. We can't stop that, okay? But we can control our response to it. So it's really important to know that a hit of anxiety, right? This is when you originally, you get that kind of tense feeling in your body. That will go away after 90 minutes at the most. And it's usually a lot less. Panic attacks, right, will take less time than that unless you end up re-triggering yourself. So this is really important, but all attempts to make anxiety go away in the short term make it worse, okay? This includes meditation and relaxation. Now, I'm not telling you not to meditate and not to relax. That's really, really clear, all right? And those can be helpful, but they're not helpful in the acute anxiety moment to make it go down. So if you're really anxious and you're meditating and you're trying to make it go away, you're actually making it worse. All right, and this is what the research tells us. This is not just my opinion. Okay. Eventually, though, we habituate to situations, even this. So I don't know about what you all experienced, but my anxiety has actually gone down a little bit each week. It was probably up, maybe 2 weeks ago, and has slowly gone down. Obviously, it's probably higher than usual, but it's not even right. As each day goes by, I'm sort of adjusting, and I think that your clients will in time as well. You can let them know that the way they feel today is not necessarily how they're going to feel in a week or two, and our nervous system will adjust to all of this. in the sense that at a certain point, every day you wake up and you're alive, that actually will weaken the anxiety's signal about this, because it's no longer predictive that something bad is going to happen. So the key to overcoming anxiety and OCD now or anytime is to learn to live with uncertainty. And so we're going to talk a lot about it. You're going to hear uncertainty, that word, a lot today. But this is my kind of little take on this is, what I think this experience has shown all of us is how just totally uncertain life is. No one predicted this, okay? No one predicted this. I don't see anyone in a year or now or whenever when this thing is over looking back and saying, wow, I made all this money predicting that this would happen. This has totally took the world and everyone else pretty much by surprise. Obviously, there were signs from China earlier this year, but this is pretty much shown really how we can't predict anything. Even our best statistical models did not prepare for this, right? And in fact, everything is uncertain, right? We could all die tomorrow in an hour, and that's very unsettling for people. And usually, because most of us go through life really not thinking about that, but for people that have anxiety or experience anxiety disorders, they have had to learn how to embrace uncertainty as a way of managing their anxiety and OCD. So they've developed what I consider a sort of superpower to be able to do this, that we now need to sort of teach more the general population or our clients or whoever else is showing up in our life right now. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about health anxiety right now, because I'm seeing this, obviously a lot of this. I would say that while the majority of my clients are doing okay during this time, the one exception are the people that have a lot of health anxiety, and that's for understandable reasons. So we're going to sort of talk a little bit about this now, because everyone is probably experiencing this a little bit. And I imagine that even when this thing is over, there's going to be a huge rise in sort of health anxiety cases. So it'll be helpful to kind of review how the DSM breaks this down. It's actually kind of interesting. So the DSM, by the way, all health anxiety, I conceptualize as basically on the OCD spectrum, in the sense that it's going to be obsessive thoughts about one's safety, that one does compulsive activity in order to sort of neutralize the thought for. So the first sort of anxiety disorder around health is somatic symptom disorder, and this is when people have an actual symptom, right? A pain that, or a perceived symptom that they end up really focusing obsessively on what the symptom is and what it means. All right. So this is going to be very much symptom focused. They're going to experience this ego syntonically, meaning that it feels very real to them, and it feels like they're doing the right thing in investigating this, right? So you never want to invalidate or question the symptom itself. Everyone knows that, but just want to remind people of that. And so somatic symptom disorder is really going to be focused on a particular pain or symptom that they have. Illness anxiety, and this is what used to be called hypochondria, is when you're preoccupied with having or acquiring an illness, any sort of vague illness, but you have little or no symptoms, all right? So this is going to be a little bit further on the anxiety disorder spectrum, in the sense that you don't really have any symptoms, or maybe you have very little symptoms, right? And you're just extremely concerned about your health status, right? This is like illness anxiety. I would describe as if you've ever had to get any sort of a test done and you're waiting for the results, and you kind of those couple of days when you're on pins and needles waiting for it. This is what people with illness anxiety experience all the time. It's awful. And I think those are the people who are probably, I mean, it's hard to say, obviously, but at least the people with anxiety disorders that are probably suffering the most right now, I would say, are the illness anxiety people. OCD health-related anxiety is when you're going to have really kind of like charged thoughts, right, about acquiring a specific disease in the future, all right? and they're going to be doing sort of compulsions like hand washing all the time, or praying or counting or something like that to kind of make sure that they don't get the illness. Okay, so this is kind of a way we can break this down. And by the way, I'm at the end of this, my email address will be on there, and I can send this presentation and a bunch of other things we're going to be talking about to anyone that wants it. So you don't have to, if any of this would be helpful to you. So here, this is kind of a way we can think about illness, anxiety, the somatic symptom disorder on the left here, and it's really people that you're really focused on if you have a specific symptom or pain. Illness, anxiety is going to be fear of currently having or possibly getting an illness, and the OCD is really going to be to tend to be a little bit more bizarre, I would say, or the less rational ones is going to be more the OCD, and they're the ones that might engage in things like the more compulsions that don't appear to be related to the actual illness. So for instance, counting or something like that is obviously not going to help you with any sort of health concerns. So some of the more sort of strange compulsions are going to be more OCD related. And here's obviously is just a chart of how health anxiety works. You get some sort of intrusive thought about your symptom or something that's going on. You're going to experience discomfort. So you're going to check the symptom or research it online. You're going to call the doctor. You're going to ask people about it. And maybe you'll get a little bit of a sense of relief in the short term, right? But that's actually going to fuel the whole thing and look for it. Now, so probably now the coronavirus actually has certain qualities that are particularly horrible for health anxiety. Okay, so the coronavirus, like HIV, has certain unique characteristics that fuel on anxiety. So things like cough or fatigue, which are very vague, right? I've been reading a lot about sort of asymptomatic carriers, right? So that anyone can have it, right? And by the way, this is all information I got from the New York Times, just their information on it. Symptoms overlap with flu, which is very, very common. The fact that it has a long incubation period, and that it, quote, can be deadly. And also that there's a lot of conflicting information out there. The fact that it can survive for I've heard someone say 9 days on surfaces. And this is from the New York Times. They actually said that any symptom that is severe or concerning could be coronavirus. And so, this type of thing is just for someone with illness, anxiety, or those type of things. It's all so vague that it's going to absolutely fuel their uncertainty concerns and make them very, very, very anxious. Now, just so this might be helpful here. This is I got actually from a treatment center in Florida. This could be helpful for you to show to people the differences between COVID-19, the flu, allergies, and OCD. So this might be a helpful thing to show. Now, some of you, I'm sure right now, are probably asking, well, shouldn't you have some anxiety about your health be adaptive and normal and correct? And I would say, yes, of course. But what I would focus on and working with people is the need for certainty around and the need to be certain about something, okay? So that's really what you want to target, is they're needing to know for 100% certainty that they don't have the coronavirus, that they might get the coronavirus, or that some symptom means something, right? And in the end, none of us know, right? Even if you get a test right now and it says negative, even that isn't 100%. Nothing is 100%. There's no such thing as certainty. Certainty is really a feeling. It's not a fact. So that's the part of it. The obsessive need for certainty with people about their health is what's going to cause them anxiety. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about OCPD. I was debating whether to put this in or not, but I decided to at the end, just because obviously OCPD is a personality disorder that really has to show up over a long period of time. But I have noticed these type of traits showing up in people, especially online, okay? and that, OCPD is a way of dealing with one's fear and anxiety by kind of controlling other people and telling other people what to do, right? And I've seen a lot of this. It seems like people, they're very anxiety or fear ridden during the day, and then they go on at night and they tell other people what to do. So people's sort of inner sheriff has been coming out, and they get online and they tell everyone what to do. They should do this, they should do that. And they're very, very controlling and trying to do this. And obviously some of this is understandable and I get it. But there's also a way in which the way in which people are delivering this information is at times very charged and can be a little bit negative and not helpful, in my opinion. Okay, so we're going to talk now a little bit about what to do and how we can help our clients during this time. So essentially, this is we're using an integrative approach, which is going to combine acceptance and commitment therapy, right? And the essential things about ACT are that anything that we do to try to control our inner experience makes it worse, all right? So what you resist persists. And the other thing is that even when we're anxious, right, we can still make values-based decisions, right? And still have a good life and still do things, a meaningful life at least, no, scratch the good part, at least a meaningful life, even though we're anxious. We're also going to use some principles of exposure therapy, right? Which is that to some degree, you have to walk through your fear and face your fear and not avoid it in order to go through it. Okay. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the actual concrete suggestions. So the sort of the tip number one is modeling courage yourself. All right. And this is in a lot of ways like the most important one of all. So during this time, it's really important that we show up for the people that we work with, right? And are consistent, show up on time, even when we're online. All right, this will really, really help contain people and give them a sense that everything is, if not normal, that things have not completely gone away. Right. So your job, I think, when you're working with people in this time, is to contain the anxiety, but it's not your job to make the fear or anxiety go away. All right. So it can be uncomfortable to sit with it, but if you can even just your presence there can do a huge amount. So the example I like to use for this is to think of an airline pilot during times of turbulence. I'm sure we've all been on an airplane when it starts to shake around, and you're kind of sitting there and you're waiting, and then the pilot comes on and he goes, he or she will say, "Hi, we're experiencing some turbulence right now. I don't know exactly when it's going to end around this time, but we got it." And you kind of go, "Okay, great," and you feel better, right? And I think we can do that for the people we work with. Is all we let them know is, yes, this is a tough time. We're going through this, but we can get through this together. So again, manage your own anxiety is really the best way to help your clients with their own. At the same time, I want you to know that it's okay if you get spiked. I got spiked last week by someone in session, and I think they were talking about all sorts of financial fears that they had, and it was so great that even I got spiked, and that doesn't happen that much. It's okay, all right? You can still show up for your session and your clients even if you're feeling anxious, right? And I just kind of sat with it and it went away. Most importantly, courage is doing the right thing even when you're afraid, right? So it's okay to be afraid and have anxiety. You can still do the right thing. Next. Okay, limiting news exposure. So going online and looking at the news, it really doesn't help. And I'm going to kind of tell you why here. So we go online and we look at this because we want to, quote unquote, stay informed, right? But really what we're doing when we're going online is we're actually looking for good news and for safety and for some sort of reassurance. All right. And, obviously, we're talking about exposure therapy here, and now I'm telling you not to expose yourself to the news. So how does that make sense? Well, the idea is right now we are living in an exposure right now, and the actual real world is plenty enough stress. Okay. So in fact, we're living in the exposure, and it's the going online looking for good news that's actually the compulsion, right? So of course, I'm not saying that no one's going to completely turn off the news, but I would really try to limit yourself to 20, 30 minutes a day. I'm actually down to 10. And even that some days is too much. If you find the news, particularly triggering or anxiety producing, your clients do, they can have someone else look for them and then just give them the highlights or the lowlights, whatever you want to call them. All right. Social media is a very mixed bag right now. Obviously there's some good stuff going on. People are doing performances and there's some good charts and people are helping each other out, but there's a lot of really, really negative, unhealthy stuff right now. And, these are people who I like and are in my friend group, but at the same time, I've tried to avoid Facebook because when I looked last week, after about 10 minutes, I felt awful. So I've been trying to really limit that. So what do you do instead? If your client has a fear and they want to talk about something, is I would really try to process it out. So if they say, I'm afraid I'm going to get the coronavirus, you could say to them, well, okay, well, what would happen if you did? And you would go through the whole situation, the whole scenario, and really play it out. And, what would you do? Okay, you would make this call, you would go here, you would do this, you would do this. And you really try to emphasize that even if this happened, they would cope and they would find a way. All right. So you want to really emphasize their ability and their capacity to cope. Okay. Next, limit health research. So going online, researching your symptoms is really one of the worst things you could possibly do. If it really, most of the time, it's really just going to make you feel much, much worse. All right. So researching symptoms online is actually going to end up re-triggering the thoughts, and you're actually going to make yourself feel like you have symptoms by going online a lot, right? So it's not a great idea. If you have to do it, I would just say pick like one site and limit it to that. I'm trying to suggest people that they rely on objective measures like their temperature or something like that, rather than trying to check vague symptoms. Obviously, during this time, it's really normal to have some symptoms regardless. We're all under a lot of stress. We've had a lot of change, and it's going to show up in our body in some way, right? So, I can say like, I think it was on Tuesday, I came home at night and I had a headache. And of course, my head, well, my God, maybe I'm getting sick. And then I realized that I had done, 8 hours of staring at Zoom all day. And, that was probably the actual, the culprit, and it was, all right? So we're all under a lot of stress. It's understandable to have some symptoms, right? And just let people know that even if you do have something, you're never going to be certain that you have anything, right? So even a test at this point is 100%. So again, I'm not saying here, don't monitor your health. I'm not saying don't call the doctor if you're feeling sick. I'm just saying limit your research. If you're doing more than 15 minutes to research a day, I would try to limit it. Okay. Stop reassuring. Okay. This is like sometimes the hardest one here, but as we talked about earlier, life is uncertain. So don't lie to your clients and pretend like you can predict the future. All right. We can't. All right. So instead of saying something like everything will be okay, that's not going to happen. Instead, you could say, I'm not sure what will happen, but I know you can handle it regardless. Or I believe in you. I know that you'll figure it out. All right. If you really can't give up reassuring, then just try to limit it to once or twice a session. All right. I'm not so cold that I won't give a reassurance maybe once or twice, but you really have to be careful about your clients coming in and wanting, in a lot of fear, looking for you for reassurance. and you obviously are, we all want to be helpful, so we want to calm them down, and we give it to them, and we end up co-compulsing with them and actually making things worse. All right. So you really want to try to limit yourself when you do that. Next, praise, praise, praise. Obviously, this is, you know, a seemingly obvious, but I think it's one that we forget, is during this time is to really look and at your client and praise certain aspects of them, remind them of challenges in the past that they have overcome, right? And show and really talk about their resilience, right? Resilience, I know, is kind of a buzzword, but I think it's going to be even more important now. We really got to focus on people's natural ability to get through stuff. Solution-focused therapy is really good for this. Like, this is what I think is great about that modality. This is kind of what they're great at, is really digging and finding things that the client is good at and reminding them of that and giving them a little bit of that every session, right? So maybe they've overcome depression or OCD, or maybe they're sober, right? So you can remind them that they have gone through stuff that's really difficult before. Okay. So get existential, go there. Now, this is not going to be work with every person, but certain people that I've been working with, they've wanted to go there, and I say, fine, I'll do it. I'm sort of a closet existentialist and have been for a lot of my life, so this isn't totally foreign to me. But I think one of the things we've kind of realized now is that, you know, civilization is a lot more fragile than we realized, and you know, the world in a lot of ways is not as run as tightly as we thought, and that can be really, really scary, right? Death is actually always all around us. It's always present. It's always there. It can happen at any time. Things are uncertain. And, you know, we in a lot of ways, there are certain guideposts and things that we can use, but you're never really going to be certain that you're doing the right thing in your life, right? And there really, you know, there is no they, okay? And one of the things I've heard from a lot of people is everyone's looking for they for guidance, you know, the government, the board, all these things. But, you know, these are really just collections of individuals who are having probably similar fears that we are now, right? So a lot of ways, we always have to rely on ourselves and our own capacity to make meaning, right? So meaning must be created by each person, right? Individually. There's no inherent meaning anywhere. And more importantly, though, it's you get to decide what type of person you want to be during this time, right? How do you want to show up? More on that is, this is a great time to explore values with your clients. Like, what do you stand for, right? You know, what kind of person do you want to be during this time, right? What kind of partner do you want to be? How do you want to show up for the people in your life? What kind of worker? What's important to you, right? And really engage people with this. You know, do you want to look back, you know, 3-6 months from now, look back at this time, and how did you handle this, right? What kind of person were you? Did you handle this with congruent with your values, or did you not live up to them? You know, what type of person you want to be, and then you get to just try and be that person, right? What kind of clinician? The last but not least, for the clinical tip, feel your feelings. Yes, I'm telling you to feel your feelings. So, you know, I've been asking everyone here, it's like, when is the last time you cried? If you haven't cried in the last couple of weeks, then something you might want to examine. So, first of all, I am telling people who are worrying a lot to actually do worry time. I'm sure some of you have done worry time. You know, worry is not feelings, but at times, sometimes we need to actually work through our worries in order to get to feelings. So I have been people doing writing, spend 10 minutes a day writing all their worries down, and on a piece, you know, and then they can read them to you in session. And then also, when they're not in that 10 minutes of worry time, you know, they know that they have that time scheduled every day. I mean, this really works for people, right? So, you know, if you get a worry throughout the day, you say, don't worry, I've got my time scheduled to do that. Now, in terms of feeling your feelings, right, I would actually, you know, if people haven't done it, you haven't done it, I advocate scheduling a time to cry, right? And, you know, you put on, you can, you know, if it's hard to actually just cry, You can put some music on or a movie that moves you. I had one person I'm working with, and they swear by Frank Ocean, his last album, that really helps them. But you'll all find one that really works for you. But put something on, put on some music, and just let it come out. It's very, very helpful to cry, and I think that it's holding in your feelings, right, that can actually really be a lot more destructive than letting them out. And so people sometimes are concerned that if they start to cry, then it's going to be too much, or it's not going to stop. And you can just let them know that that's not going to happen, and it's healthy and adaptive to cry, right? So I would really recommend that. So what I thought we would do now for the next 15 minutes is we're going to do a little exercise, an acceptance, a commitment therapy exercise that you can actually do with your clients that can help them pull all this together. So I'm going to give everyone maybe 30 seconds. You want to go grab a piece of paper, right? And a pen, and we can kind of do this. You can fill out your own along the way. So I'll give everyone a few seconds to do that. Okay. So this is this is called the ACT matrix. It's something I really, really like. And I think this is especially helpful right now. All right. And this is so we're going to divide this into 4 quadrants here. And if you see, because it's kind of hard to do this on over Zoom, I'm going to call quadrant on the bottom right, quadrant 1, on the bottom left, number 2, on the upper left, number 3, and on the upper right, number 4. Okay. So the question you first want to ask for this is, we're going to start in quadrant 1, and we're going to ask them, and you can do this for yourself, who is important in your life right now? Who, right? So who is one or a couple of people that are important to you, right? And you're going to write a list down there. I'm going to show you who, this is the ones that I came up with, all right? And after you say who is important to you right now, you're going to say what is important to you right now, right? So who or what is important to you right now. Now, if people have a hard time coming up with answers, right, then you can do more values work. And I'm going to actually send anyone that wants it a sort of values exercise they can do with their clients that can help with this. But most people have a pretty, can come up with a list of things that are important to them. Okay, so I put down my wife, my daughter, my clients, my patients, coworkers, and these are the things that are important to me. Now we're going to move into quadrant number 2. And I'm going to say, all right, do you spend 100% of your time right now doing things that move you towards quadrant 1? So do you spend all your time doing things that actually move you toward what's important to you? And obviously people are going to say no, because no one does 100%. So you would then say, okay, what type of unwanted internal stuff, right, comes up for you that keeps you from moving towards the people and the things that are important to you, all right? And you're going to write those down in quadrant number 2. So that would be fear, anxiety, anger, like feelings of I'm not good enough, what if questions, right? So this is all going to be stuff that you can't see, right? And if I put a little video camera up there in the upper right to sort of show everything above the line is stuff that you can see. Everything below the line is stuff that you can't see, right? So, clients are going to come up with fear, anxiety, this could be, health-related concerns, anything that they do, any sort of stuff that you can't see, any fears, any thoughts that they have, maybe memories, sadness, anything like that, you're going to put into quadrant number 2. Okay. Next, we're going to move to quadrant number 3. And we're going to say, what type of things do you do? What type of behaviors do you do to kind of manage the stuff in quadrant number 2? All right. So these are the things, basically, what are the things do we do to kind of check out, right? And try to manage our fear and anxiety, right? So these are some ones that I put down. Go on the internet, Netflix, play with my phone, eat cookies, order stuff on Amazon, isolate. All right. Now I'm kind of old and boring now, so this is not the most exciting list, but other things that people would do would be, smoke a lot of weed, watch porn, trying to research their symptoms online. Any sort of drug use might be put up there. Watching tons of TV, anything we do, like sleeping a ton, any of that would be stuff we would put up in quadrant number 3. Now, again, we don't judge any of these things, right? So this quadrant number 3 is not good or bad. We just try to understand that the function of these behaviors is to mitigate or to manage stuff in quadrant number 2, right? So we're all going to have these type of checkout behaviors, right? And we're just going to put them up in quadrant number 3. So, okay, last but not least, we're going to say in quadrant number 4, what type of behaviors do you do or could you do that would actually move you towards quadrant number 1, okay? So for me, I put hugs, go for a run, call my parents, reach out to clients, read, or do, CE units, all right? All those would all be behaviors and things that I could do that would actually move me towards things that I value and things that are important to me, right? As opposed to the stuff in quadrant number 3, which, yes, it kind of helps in the short term with quadrant number 2 on things, but doesn't actually bring me towards quadrant number 1, which is really where I want to go, okay? And so, quadrant number 4, sometimes, they'll have a hard time coming up with things, right? Like, what am I supposed to do? I'm bored out of my mind. I'm at home. And you can spend really time with them coming up with lists of things to do, whether it's online classes, online forums, calling people, reading, different forms of exercise, yoga, meditation, right? There's all sorts of things you can do, and you can help them fill up number 4 with a whole list of things that they can do. Okay, so once you have this kind of filled out, and by the way, sometimes just explain the difference between number 3 and number 4. Sometimes I like to say, someone will say, well, what about Netflix, right? I watch Netflix with my partner or my friend, right? And so I would say that Netflix for the first episode or 2 would be a quadrant 4 one, but when you're on episode 7 or 8 and it's been on autopilot, then it's probably in number 3, okay? So the same behavior, something like Netflix, can actually be in either quadrant depending on whether its function is, okay? So if I'm watching Netflix in order to bond with my daughter or to bond with my wife, that's one thing. But if I'm using it just to keep my fear and anxiety away and to isolate and things like that, then it's really in quadrant 3. Okay, so once you sort of fill that up, you've got this going, you then on the bottom are going to write life number 1 and life number 2, all right? So you're going to want to say to them, okay, so if you were, during this time, these next couple of weeks, months, whatever, that we're kind of all living like this, right? If you're going to look back and you would say, did I want to live life number 1, right? Which is going to be quadrants 2 and 3, right? Where my goal is to kind of keep my fear and anxiety down and avoid and isolate. Or do I want to live life number 2, all right? And life number 2, where I do all these things and do things that are values congruent to stuff that I care about. Now, the vast majority of people will say life number 2, but some will actually choose life number 1. And that's, by the way, that's totally okay. All right. Again, there's not one is better than the other. All right. But if life number 1 is what you want, just try to own that and just realize that this is what I'm trying to do right now is to just, my life, what's important to me is keeping fear and anxiety down. Now that life may be small, right, or constrained, but that's my choice, okay? And we don't judge them for that, right? But if you want to live life number 2, okay, that's a whole different thing. And what I would say is the most important thing that we want to kind of work with people in is letting them know that they can still do stuff in quadrant number 4, right? They can still do all that stuff, even if they're feeling like number two. Okay, like when I say number two, I mean quadrant number two. So in other words, even if I am afraid and I have anxiety, I can still reach out to my clients. I can still go for a run. Right? I can still do these things that are values congruent. You don't have to feel great to do those things. All right. So that's really the message that we want to try to impart to people. And I would have, people, they like, sometimes I'll have them take the picture of this on their phone and carry it around, and even just sort of check in throughout the week. Where are they on this chart? What's worked and what hasn't, And if maybe they've done a lot of number 3 type behaviors, you can ask, okay, how has that worked? Has that made your fear and anxiety go away? Or has it made you feel worse? How has that worked out for you? And maybe we can come up with some different number 4 things to do that might actually make your life a little bit bigger. Okay. So some final thoughts here. This is kind of a favorite of mine. So the Russian writer Dostoevsky. I don't know if people know this, but he was involved in some political activities early in his life, and sort of anti-government stuff. And he was arrested, and they sentenced him to 4 years in a Siberian prison camp. And before they sent him there, the Tsar played a very, very cruel joke on him. And essentially, he ordered a mock execution to be performed on him and the members of his group. And they sort of lined them all up in the prison yard, and they did everything they would do in a real execution. Okay, so they brought out the soldiers, they had everyone there, they said some words, and everyone pulled up their guns, and they kind of counted 1, 2, 3, and then at the last second, they stopped. All right, and so at that last second, right, they said, okay, you can go. And a lot of the members of his group apparently went insane after this, and one can understand why. But for Dostoevsky, this actually had like the opposite effect. And this experience, for whatever reason, where he kind of looked death in the eye and got through it, gave him an incredible clarity. And afterwards, released from prison, he went on a tear that was, I think, the greatest in all of literature. Really, he wrote Crime and Punishment, The Idiot, and Brothers Karamazov and the Brothers, and in a very short period of time. And he really credits this experience for being incredibly clarifying for him, and it kind of allowed him to, he was able to cut down on his drinking and his gambling and things like that, and to be able to get to really focus on his life's mission. So I'm sure a lot of you saw this quote from Bill Gates, which is really interesting. He said, where many see the coronavirus as a great disaster, I prefer to see it as a great corrector. I actually do see this as a great clarifier. I think this is one of those times in life when you really get a chance to focus on what's important, and things that are unimportant kind of go on the back burner and kind of drift away. So at least it's been that experience for me. And the last but not least is that, we are all uniquely trained for this. At times, obviously, we're all under a lot of strain, and we may feel like we may not up for the job, but we are actually the best trained for this of anyone. We're used to dealing with people and all sorts of distress all the time. This is a collective trauma that is going to require a lot of healing from. Obviously, we're still in it and it's not over yet, right? But the aftermath from this is going to take a really, really, really long time, all right? So I know this is a strange thing to say, but this is actually a really good time to be in the mental health profession, all right? And I want you to know that, yes, I did just reassure you there, but I only did it once, okay? So on that note, I just wanted to thank you all for listening and being there, and we'll now have some time for some questions and discussions. Oh, before I do that, I wanted to extend this. This is my email address, noah@straightuptreatment.com. And this is also my cell phone number, 213-446-3666. And I want to make myself available to anyone if they want to, they can text me or can email me. Anyone who wants to jump on a call to do any sort of consult or ask any questions or anything like that about this or anything else, I'm available. I want to just make sure that I'm there for people if they need anything or anything else that I can do. And of course, if you, you send me an email, I will send you these slides along with a little ACT matrix exercise and a values exercise that you can use if some of this wasn't clear. Because obviously trying to teach this online this is my first time having to do that. So anyway, after that, I will now turn it over to Dr. Gur.
Dr. Larissy, thank you so much for such an incredible presentation. It's, so helpful to have the, the sort of practical information in front of us, but also to do an exercise. My husband was doing the exercise along with us, and it's really good to be able to have these practical tools. So we do have a number of questions popping up. So I'm just going to ask some questions for you. So if our attendees have any questions for Dr. Larissy, there is a Q&A box at the bottom, little speech bubbles. Please feel free to put questions in there, and I'll read them to Dr. Larissy, and he can respond. So I think we've actually answered the first one. Jordan Heath had asked, will the slides be available following the presentation? So I think you said you would be, if people want to email you, that you would be okay sharing those. Is that accurate?
Yes. Yes, I will send the slides as well as a couple of other little ACT exercises. And if people want more, they can send me stuff, and I'll send whatever I have. Absolutely.
Perfect. And will you just go back to the last slide that has your email address? So
sure. Oh, sure.
That down. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Great. And then we'll go over to the other one a little bit later. So Jordan Heath, his question, or her question, I'm sorry, I don't know if it's a male or a female, Jordan, I apologize. Referring to the slide where meditation and breathing doesn't actually help with acute anxiety, what do you suggest to those clients who are acutely or chronically anxious if breathing and meditation won't necessarily help in the moment?
Okay, that's a great question, and thank you, because I want to be really clear on that. So, by the way, I meditate and regularly, and I do find it helpful. What you don't want to do is, if someone is, let's just say on a scale of 1 to 10, and they're like a 7 or an 8, and you say, go meditate, right? They're going to sit there in their head, and they're going to be utterly miserable, and they're going to be wondering why it doesn't work, and it's actually going to be feeding into it. So absolutely meditate, and you can do relaxation, but do it from when you're not in an acutely anxious state. That's what I would say. Now, so meditation does have benefits for anxiety, but not when it's done when we're acutely anxious. So what do you do when someone is acutely anxious? Let's just say they're really spiked. The number one thing I have to let people know is they just need to sit with it, and it will go down on its own. People don't like to hear this, but it really is the best thing they can do. And then once they realize that it will go away on its own, right? It's actually in the long term very helpful to them, because the next time it does come up, they have that experience that will last. The one other thing you can do, and this helps a little bit, and this is what they'll do. So if you call 911, if you have a panic attack, is they're going to essentially have you each check in with each one of the senses, right? So you'll have someone say, you pick, you go sight, and you'll say, can you just tell me everything red in the room, right? And have them look around the room and talk about what's red, right? Everything that's in the room. And then you'll go to hearing, and you'll go through hearing to tell me exactly what you hear, right? You'll close your eyes, and they can tell you what they hear. And then you can go through smell, right? And you go through each of those 5 senses. Is because they're so focused on the one sense, right? Sometimes that makes them a lot more present and a little less in their head. And that can make the anxiety go down a little bit. So that would be my tip that I would suggest for that.
Perfect, thank you. I hope that answered your question, Jordan. If not, add a follow-up in the Q&A for us. Alejandra Rose had asked, will the slides be available? Yes, they will, Alejandra. You just email Dr. Larissy at the address that's on the screen right now. And there is going to be a recording. We are, in fact, recording all of our CEUs And we will send a note or put it on Facebook as to where you'll be able to see the recordings again. So thank you for your question. So we also have an anonymous question. Can you talk a little bit about those with agoraphobia that are in fact loving the current situation, perhaps, you know, of having that sort of justified staying in the house, not going out, and everybody sort of living locked inside, and how one might prepare them for a return to, you know, normal once the situation is over? Is that something you can speak about?
Oh, that's a great question. And yes, so I have a number of people I work with where this is like a gift to some degree, right? Like this is a great excuse not to have to do anything. So here's what I would say is, even if you have agoraphobia, I am having one person I work with, she still has to go out and go for a walk every day and go walk around the block. You can still do it, all right? Obviously, you have to say, they know you don't go and talk to anyone, you keep away. But even during this time, you can still actually go outside. And I've found people that, you know, even after a couple of days, going outside the first time is actually really anxiety producing. So I let them know, we got to do this now. Otherwise, if in a couple of weeks, it's just going to be brutal, right? So, you know, you don't want people to regress too much during this time. So some regression is going to be, obviously is going to happen. It's understandable. And, you know, some regression is even adaptive, but I really try to let people know that they can still practice this stuff. They can still go outside. They can still walk around and not be stuck in the house. Or drive, you know, even if obviously you don't want to be doing a lot, but if you have to go, just getting outside a little bit is still a good thing.
Thank you. We have another question. You said that one should avoid social media and news as much as possible. How do we get teens and most adults to actually do that, especially with the shelter-in-place order at this time? What are your sort of recommendations to your clients as to how to sort of train themselves to engage in that less?
Well, yeah. So I hear you, and I know it's probably some of this is a losing battle, but a lot of this is do you really? I would say to them, you know, like let's just say 6 months ago, do you want to look back and say, well, what did you do during that time? And you said, well, I played on Instagram. You know, is that what you want your legacy to be? And if that's okay with you, then that's okay. The other thing I would also say is that, you know, does being just checking out like that, does it really help? Does it really make you feel better? And in its own way, aren't you just kind of avoiding things? And, you know, once you eventually put it down, all this stuff still going to be there, right? So, you know, I would try to use use some sort of a values exercise, because again, what's really important here is I don't want to like ever tell someone what to do, right? It's got to be about what's important to them and engaging what values they are. If their values right now are, I just want to check out until this thing's over, that's okay. I mean, that is their choice, but I want them to own that choice and to do it mindfully and not just do it on automatic pilot. So I want them to say, I'm going to completely check out the next 10 days and smoke weed and go on Facebook and I don't care. Okay, fine. That's your choice. But, you know, is this congruent with the values and who you want to be? And I would point out any discrepancies between what their values are and what they're actually doing. So if they're saying, well, my values are honesty and courage and respect, but I'm playing Call of Duty and on my phone the whole time, those may not necessarily match up. And by the way, I like Call of Duty. I'm going to play a little this weekend. So again, I'm not against it.
Thank you. We have a question from Emily Miles. And Emily, I've got a couple of questions above, so I'm not sure exactly which one you're referring to. But it says, follow up from previous question. In a DMH CBT training that she did, she was taught to monitor throughout session level of anxiety. Then at 7 out of 10, do grounding exercises where you utilize senses to lower anxiety before continuing, which is sort of what you just talked about in relation to, you know, identifying things in the room that are red. Would you support that? It does sound similar to what you just said, but she wanted to make sure.
That's a really good question. So yeah, so generally when we're doing like something like an exposure, right? Yeah, you're like, I mean, 7, I would probably go to an 8, but I get it. 7's a probably good enough number. We don't want people getting that high, right? So like a 7 is about as bearable as someone can take. So I would generally say yes, that's fine. But also it really is somewhat client dependent. I have some clients that will just say, "Oh my God, I'm at 10, I'm at a 10," and then 15 minutes later, they're okay. So even if you are at an 8 or a 9, I want them to know that they can still sit with it and it will go down. But yeah, generally I would agree with that with that protocol that she was saying. Yeah.
Perfect. We do have time for more questions, so if people want to put them in the Q&A at the bottom, that would be great. There was a question Alejandra Rose also mentioned about the ongoing webinars that we will be doing, and is there an email list? So everybody who registered for this event, we now have your email address, and we will be doing a number of, we'll do a mailing, an emailing, probably through Constant Contact, that will give you the details and the links. And then it will also be posted on the Visions Facebook and Instagram pages. So just so you guys know, we have a series of 4. Dr. Larisius was the first. We have next week, it will be with Dr. Deborah Sweet, who is actually here with us today in this presentation. She will be doing our next CE event, and that will be on self-regulation for therapists and for clients. The following week is going to be Mike Jackson, and his is natural personalities differences and how to utilize that in conflict resolution, specifically in families. And then we also have another event, John, who is, I'm afraid, right in front of me right now. I don't have his last name. If somebody wants to put it in for me, that would be helpful. And he is going to be doing a CE event on LGBTQ and sexuality. And that's John Sovek. My apologies for forgetting that. So yes, we will make sure that you have access to all the upcoming CEUs, and we will be doing one a week right the way through to the end of the month, and then we'll likely continue while we're all in this current sort of situation. Stephen from up north is saying thank you for the presentation today. Do we have any other questions? We do, we have another one. So how do you best work with clients' resistance during this time? Specifically, resisting to sort of sitting with their anxiety, resisting to living in uncertainty. How are you helping your clients manage with that?
So I would say that with that is I would say I would have them make a list of all the things. This is essentially going to be, if we're looking back at the ACT matrix, sort of quadrant 3 stuff. Make a list of all the stuff that they've tried to make their anxiety go away. Right? You get a huge list, like 10, 15 things, right? You write them all down. And then you can say, well, have any of these worked for you, right? And have any of them helped? And they'll kind of say, well, no. Well, in the short term, yes, but the long term, no. And you can say, okay, are you open to trying something different, right? And if they're not, that's their choice, all right? So in terms of like living with uncertainty, right? The sort of the classic way that you introduce this, and this is Jonathan Grayson, this is not mine, but you say to someone, hi, you say, you tell me about someone that's really important to you right now, right? And this is usually when you do in session live. So, and they would say, oh, my child or my husband or my wife or this person. And you say to them, are they alive right now? And they go, of course they are. And they go, are you 100% certain? Are you 100% certain, right, that they're not dead? And they go, no. And you're like, yeah, see, so you don't know. They could have died right now. They could have died a minute ago, and we just didn't know, right? So how did you get through that moment? And they go, well, I just didn't think about it. It never crossed my mind. There you go. You're in denial about this fact. And what we want to do is kind of show that everything is uncertain. Most of us just use denial to not think about things, right? So during this time, we just have to actually more radically face our fears, right? But once we can do this and really look under the rock and really look at life as it is, and we can adapt to that fact, it's like a superpower that we can use for the rest of our lives. So I think this is an incredible opportunity to people really practice radical uncertainty, really embracing it, really seeing it for what it is, and they can carry this on. And if you can look this in the eye, you can look almost anything. That's how I would pitch it.
Thank you. Just so everybody knows, Georgina has just posted the link in the chat. So the chat is at the bottom, in your bottom bar. That link is in order for you to go to the evaluation form to fill that out for the CE events. No, we do have another question. So with the prevalence of racism and hate crimes towards Asian American Pacific Islander population that's really been on the rise since the outbreak of COVID-19, obviously this understandably triggers fear and anxiety for many of this individual's clients and for individuals in general. Do you have any additional suggestions to assist these clients and loved ones in addressing these concerns? And then also, would you say that the ACT matrix can be applicable with this issue, specific issue?
Well, okay, that's a very good question, and you know, I would, to be honest, I mean, that's a tough one to answer. So let me give you some thoughts. You know, first of all, for this particular one, I would, you know, I did talk to someone yesterday who is involved with the local police, and you know, I would say there actually has been a reduction in crime during this time, and the fact that even the quote unquote criminals are at home, and generally they don't like to bother people when they're at home. So I haven't seen a huge amount of evidence for this yet. Now, obviously, as we know, that's using reason and logic, and that's not necessarily going to work. Although in this particular case, I would try and do that. In terms of the ACT matrix is really one about living your values during this time. But so what I would say here is to someone is, okay, let's just say that you were the victim. I mean, this is a tough conversation. What if you were the victim of a hate crime? And actually talk through it with them, what they would do, right? What would happen, right? You know, and saying that, yeah, it would be terrible if that happened, but that they would cope. And again, obviously that's not, I'm not expecting that to make someone feel better, but it will reduce some of their fear and anxiety around it, because a lot of what happens is people are resisting and fighting thoughts about this, right? So it may reduce the amount of thoughts that they've had once they've been able to sort of process it out a little bit. I hope that makes sense.
Thank you. We still have a little more time. Does anybody else have any questions that you want to throw up there? Dr. Larissy, I was interested. I have clients whose anxieties are really, kicking off. I have a client that I work with who, for a number of different reasons, the not being able to get to the gym, not being able to exercise, and obviously this person can take a walk around the block or run around the block or whatever, but is also living in an area where there's it's high population. And so when you have individuals who, often a lot of us who are working with people in different stages of treatment, have that kind of anxiety where being unable to act out in some way is going to potentially exacerbate, whether, like you said earlier, drug or alcohol use, or an eating disorder or something like that. Obviously, it's not specifically OCD, although we do look at eating disorders as being, related to obsessive compulsive. So what are your thoughts on how to manage really what is a blend of anxiety and acting out in a way that's going to become physically very problematic? How would you normally respond to a client under those circumstances?
So the not exercising one is I really like that example. I'm fortunate enough I can exercise, but I would probably be feeling the same way, and because that's a pretty important coping thing that I have, and I would be really reluctant to give that up. So that's the one where you really have to employ acceptance, and acceptance sucks. I mean, that's what you have to say is like, acceptance is not easy, but really the idea is, how much time am I spending fighting and resisting the fact that I can't exercise? All right. So, if you can look up ACT rope exercise is a really good one there. You can't do this in person, but that's one in which you actually will like, you kind of fight with the client and you each grab the rope, and eventually you then eventually kind of drop the rope in a way to kind of show that how much easier it is. So I would try to engage them in some way and just saying all this resistance and fighting against the fact you can't exercise is actually causing half of your suffering. All right. Now it's not all of your suffering, but if we can just stop fighting and resisting it and just be an acceptance over the fact, in time it will actually go down. So that's what I would say.
Thank you. Is there anything, as we sort of move toward the end of the session, is there anything that is not necessarily in your presentation that you've been noticing recently with your population that you really would, just sort of like to add for, those of us that are, still getting used to the virtual world of working with clients? And I certainly have some clients who have struggled to want to be on camera. I think it's difficult for some people who aren't used to that. How have you sort of found reducing that anxiety for any of your clients who are just not a big fan of the virtual world?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So I usually I've been doing kind of 20% online anyway. So, and at least I'd say like, so, but some people, it's really tough because of the eye, like, the eye contact, but there's a great actually ACT exercise of staring into the eyes of someone else. And part of it there is that this is actually an exposure for people, right? And actually doing this is a way that they can actually, like, you can practice some of these values, right? So listen, I've had to make adjustments. Obviously, I've never done as many online sessions as I've done. And there have been times when it's hard and I don't know what to do. And, like some of my go-to things that I usually do, I can't do. But I try to just sit with that discomfort. And I ask the person, I kind of acknowledge whoever I'm working with, hey, let's figure this out together. Let's acknowledge how uncomfortable this is right now and how different this is. And let's talk about that.
Thank you. We had another question coming up in relation to parents right now. Obviously, we've got parents at home who maybe, working parents usually out of the house and they're at home, whether it's with little ones or with, school-age kids, trying to manage their own anxieties and not being able to escape. And, one of the things that I've noticed, obviously, when people are really anxious and we have that sort of flood of cortisol and, you're sort of expecting parents who are highly anxious with kids who are highly anxious to learn, they're in these kind of forums for school and stuff. At the beginning of the day, if you're sitting down and putting, getting your kids set up with Schoology or whatever it is, and everybody is frankly anxious and having a hard time settling, are there any exercises just to start off maybe a school day for parents with their kids that you think might help reduce and get everybody focused to what the task for the day is going to be?
All right, so this is great. So first of all, the parents right now at home with kids, my heart goes out to them. I mean, I'm one of them, and so I get it. It is so hard right now. And not only that, I am just giving like a lot of the parents I work with, some of these, they're amazing. And even like the amazing parents I work with, they are struggling right now. It's just brutal. And so I'm just saying, everyone is, give yourself a little bit of a pass, or at least the next couple of weeks. It's too much, right? And so don't worry if your kids are watching more TV than usual and stuff like that. These people that are posting stuff online about, their kids are, doing impressionist paint, learning impressionist painting and stuff like that. I mean, I just think that those are not really great examples. All right. And to give yourself a break, personally, the online schooling, I think some of it is, I think the schools have been too ambitious, going from like 0 hours of online to like 7 a day. I don't know why they're not ramping it up and starting like maybe 2 hours a day and then moving to 3 next week. But I understand there's a demand for it. But what they don't realize is that parents obviously have to monitor and watch the kids while this is happening. There are all sorts of technical difficulties. So in terms of stuff in the morning, is I would just try to do jumping jacks, do something fun, race around the house, do something silly, let the tension out, have a pillow fight, something like that, just to let a little bit of out and inject some humor into the situation. That would be my suggestion.
Thank you for that. I think
Mhm.
that's a great idea.